Are you ready? Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're gonna get started here. Can we ask Reba to sit down? I'm just kidding.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to District 11 budget meeting.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday afternoon. So I'm Jay Chapa, City Manager, and we're going to cover the proposed 2027 fiscal budget. There's a little change from the last presentation. And Christiane, I'm going to introduce Christiane here in a minute. She's going to go through the presentation. But last week on the 11th, under state law, the city's not like the feds where we can do deficit budgeting. We have to have a balanced budget. So last week on the 11th, staff, myself, proposed a balanced budget to the city council across all funds. And specifically, the general fund was the one we're having issues with, primarily due to property tax valuations or property values and the shortfall on the property tax side. So if you think about the city, we're basically a conglomerate where we have multiple different businesses all within one organization. And so when you think about a shortfall in the general fund makes up about a third of the city's operating budget. Overall operating budget's about $3.3 billion. The general fund's about $1.1 billion. The problem is you can't take money from those other funds to help a fund that's short because the dollars have to stay within those operating funds. So like the water department, the water utility, water revenues that come in from ratepayers has to stay within that business. Same thing with aviation, same thing with golf, those kind of things. So when we talk about that shortfall, and Christiane will go through it, we're really talking about the general fund where the shortfall was. The change that you're going to see here is once we presented the budget to the city council, they start providing feedback on the things they like and the things that they don't like, right? And so in order to balance the general fund budget, you'll see we had a series of reductions in different areas of our operations to try to close that gap. And the council has voiced to us that they didn't like some of the cuts that were in there and some of the reductions in services. And so as we've been working with them, yesterday we proposed some restoration of some of those items. And they all pretty much said they were in favor of them. So we're gonna the budget has a little bit changed that shows what's being restored as we go through this presentation. And as you go along, feel free to raise your hand. We'll get you a mic because this is being streamed online and it's going to be recorded and put on the city's website. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll give you a mic. And I'm going to introduce Christiane Simmons. She is the Director of Strategic Strategy. I'm going blank. It's a Saturday. Anyway, she's over budget and data analytics and performance for the city. The budget, she runs a group that puts all this together, puts all the numbers together, and has been working on this for the last several months. So with no further ado, here's Christiane.
I also don't know what I'm the director of. Who knows? Thank you, Jay. So Christiane Simmons, yes, hello. Director of the Fort Worth Lab is the department. And like Jay mentioned, we do budget, data analytics, and performance for the city, lots of strategic initiatives. And I see a couple of my budget meeting friends here. So you're going to get to see like the changes in real time, which is kind of fun. So thank you for coming on a Saturday afternoon. Mostly it's just hot outside, so it's nice to be inside. But we really appreciate your engagement in the process. Some of you may have participated in bond meetings earlier this year, and maybe you did budget priorities survey. All of those different engagement points that the city provides, we love to see your participation and answer your questions along the way. All right, so just starting a bit high level here, I've done a couple different budgets with the city now, and every one kind of has its story or its themes that emerge. And this year, a lot of the theme is around the city's growth, not translating to growth in property tax values and revenue. So we're in a little bit of a tricky situation with the Tarrant Appraisal District. Some of you are aware of that situation. So we sit in 4 appraisal districts in the city of Fort Worth, but TAD is our largest. We get about 92% of our property tax revenue from them. And a couple of years ago, they adopted a reappraisal plan by which they're only reappraising residential property every other year. And so we knew that, and we were planning for that. So this is like our second year of frozen values, with the first reappraisal coming for the next budget year. So we're still frozen right now on the residential side. And we were planning for that, and that's why we had a budget gap going. We knew we had a budget gap going into the process. We were telling council about 50 million, 49 to 50 million. But when we got our certified values from the appraisal district, which happens July 25th, so like after a lot of budget work has been done, the values were much worse than we anticipated, worse than our worst case scenario. And this is primarily due to not just the reappraisal plan, but also TAD granting sort of historic numbers of protests and a lot of mid-year litigation and value loss from the rolls. So we lost a ton of value between April and July and had to kind of go back to the drawing board for some deeper budget reduction strategies. And so part of fiscal responsibility is, obviously we have to balance the budget. That's required by state law. But we don't want to cut service levels in all these departments that are public facing and that you come to rely on. And so we were trying to equitably sort of reduce where we could, continue to prioritize public safety, which is always the top priority for residents when we survey in the community, and certainly for council. And then sustain our investment in capital maintenance and our debt, which pays for our debt service from past bonds and the 2026 bond. So we're sort of, it's been like a whole journey. So we're going to go through a bit of what that detail looked like. The other night, this is a kind of a new slide. So if you've been to a budget meeting before, like Thursday night, you might not have seen this one. But this kind of demonstrates the Tarrant situation that I mentioned. So see, yellow on top is Collin County, Dallas in the middle, and then Tarrant. And this is average taxable home value over the last few years. So this is the situation we're in is primarily, again, due to the activities of TAD. And I hope that this graphic kind of shows you as your home value from a TAD perspective, appraisal perspective, is falling. And then you see Dallas and Collin growing at a more appropriate level that you might expect Fort Worth to be growing. So this is what's sort of causing a lot of our gap on the property tax side. Jay mentioned the overall budget. So operating budget of the city is $3.32 billion. That's all the operating funds, so not just the general fund. And most of the funds are restricted for purposes that we'll talk about. But we're going to focus a lot on the general fund today because that's sort of where the property tax issues affect us, and the tax rate is really the only lever that we have at the city level to pull to try to fix some of our budget issues. So here's, I call it like a nerdy finance table, if you like numbers. This is the numbers from fiscal year 26 adopted, so that's the current year budget, to next year's recommended budget. You can see about 7.5% growth across the whole budget. Again, that's not just general fund. General fund's the biggest, about a third. They're on top, so growing about 4.5%. And then the next sort of biggest grouping of funds are the enterprise service funds. Those are the funds that operate kind of more like a business, so not funded by taxes, but funded by the user fees and rates of the people who use those services. So think about the water department, for instance, solid waste, and we'll talk about a few more of those. And then the third biggest grouping of operating funds is the special revenue funds. Those are also funds with a restricted revenue source, and that revenue has to be used for the appropriate, restricted purpose. So the biggest of those is CCPD. So a lot of you are familiar with the Crime Control and Prevention District. EMS is now a special revenue fund, and there are a couple more we'll touch on. But that's sort of like the big picture budget growth from this year to next. And when we went through the recommended budget with council on the 11th of August, if you wanted to watch that, you can see a deeper dive of this slide, but we tried to kind of summarize it here for you so you could understand the process that city staff and council has gone through to this point. So we started off with that gap that I mentioned that was about $49 million, but at the highest point in the process, so after certified values and after we had added in police and fire costs that were contractually obligated that needed to be in the budget, I would say like the peak, if it all happened in one day, it would be a $94 million gap. But again, that's just like a snapshot in time. But through the process, here's some of what the city did. So we started off in March or April knowing we were facing a budget gap. And so we asked departments to turn in a budget that was already reduced by 1% to the current year. So we, the Fort Worth Lab, deliver a target budget to a department. So we say, here, police, here's your budget that you have to meet, and it's 1% less than the current year. So from the beginning, they're like kind of tightening their belt, looking at, where do we have, maybe we need to go, more paperless and quit printing as much, or maybe these, trainings are more discretionary in nature than required. So they start to kind of clean up those little bits and pieces. Then we also asked departments to not only do that 1% trim, but to turn in other options for us. So an additional 3% in reductions. So that was departments' ideas for how else we could reduce, typically a bit of a deeper cut. And so between those two actions, we garnered about $22 million in savings from the beginning. So that was helping us close that $49 million gap that we were anticipating. So we were getting close to balancing the budget, and then, like I mentioned, at the end of July, we got like the whammy from our certified values, and so we ended up taking more of those 3% cuts, and then looking even further at things like employee pay in the general fund. The general employees typically are budgeted for a 4% pay for performance raise, like a merit-based raise. So we cut that back down to only 1.5% to be implemented for the budget year. That's something that you'll see has been sort of partially restored by council in a few slides. And then we looked creatively at revenue from other funds that might be able to help the general fund for it, like if it's unrestricted in some way or if we had eligible expenses. And then finally, we kind of came to, we still had a $37 million gap even after reducing some programs and services that we knew people would maybe not love. So Jay decided to propose a tax rate increase, primarily due to the gap caused by the appraised values. So originally on the 11th, the proposed tax increase was 3.2 cents. So current year, our tax rate 67 cents, and it would rise to 70.2 cents. And this is how that tax rate breaks out. So some of you might know this chart, especially if you engaged on the bond, because when we talked about the bond, we were talking about this bottom section of the tax rate, the debt rate, and saying we're not going to increase the debt rate just because you passed the bond. So you can see we did not raise the debt rate. But now in budget, we talk about that top section. So operations and maintenance is where the majority of the tax rate goes. And in Fort Worth, we actually break that out a little further. So on the right-hand side, the 48.2, that's the money for the general fund. So that's the revenue for police, fire, parks and libraries, code, transportation, a lot of the things you think about as being core city services in the general fund. And then that bottom section is capital. You might be familiar with that term as PAYGO. We call it PAYGO, and that's pay-as-you-go capital maintenance, so cash-funded capital maintenance rather than doing basic like street maintenance and parks maintenance with debt. And so we wanted to maintain our investment there as well. So that's sort of how the recommended tax rate breaks out. So this is a new content. So if you have been with me at another meeting, this will be brand new for you. And I hope this proves that this truly is not like a fully baked budget because it's changing as we go. So you should feel good about engaging because you definitely still have time to get your feedback in. We had a number of council members yesterday who said, this is the way I'm leaning, but like I haven't had my budget meeting yet, so I want to make sure that I'm like echoing the needs of my constituents. So anyway, after yesterday, here are some of the things that are looking likely to come back into the budget. The first is retention of the PetSmart Alliance location. So originally in the budget, one of Code's 3% reductions was closure of the Alliance PetSmart Adoption Center, which is the city's off-site adoption center. It was going to kind of push those animals into the shelters, reduce the number of adoptions year over year, and council just was not comfortable with that reduction. It would affect our live release rate, which, if you pay attention, has been high this year, one of the highest in, I think, in like recent history. So that is looking like it's going to come back into the budget. And then we have a number of positions being restored for the budget. So as part of those deeper cuts, we froze and eliminated a lot of vacant positions. So not filled positions, but we looked at long-term vacancies and even not so long-term vacancies that departments are currently doing without and they maybe wouldn't prefer to continue to do without, but we said, in order to balance the budget, we'll freeze them for another 6 months or we'll freeze them for another year. Once council started getting into the detail of some of the service level impacts that come with those freezes and eliminations, they had some questions, particularly for parks, library, code, development services, and transportation. So those departments said, they turned into council just yesterday. Here are the ones we'd like to put back, and here's why. And so council seemed, with that detail, pretty willing to put these items back in the budget. So the number of positions is out to the side of each department. So code would restore the positions associated with Alliance, plus some neighborhood code inspectors that were being frozen from the budget. Parks had some recreation assistants and parks maintenance workers that would come back into the budget, and so on. Library staffing, customer service for development, and then some TPW positions as well. And then I mentioned general employee pay for performance. So civil service pay or police and fire, like sworn uniformed personnel pay, those pay amounts are contractually obligated. They have like labor agreements that set forth the raise they're getting each year. General employees don't have those kinds of contractual obligations, so they're sort of subject to the budget situation in the city year over year. And so we had balanced the budget to include a lesser pay for performance amount for employees. It was going to be 3% middle of the year, so really like a 1.5% budget impact. Council was also not comfortable with that. They didn't want to see police and fire get 6% raises and 8.5% raises respectively in the budget, and then have general employees getting what amounted to a 1.5% raise. And so we showed them a scenario yesterday in which we'd bump that amount. As a result of these items, it pushes the tax rate from 70.2 to 70.56. So it's another third of a penny on the tax rate. And I'll show you in a moment, I think it mentions it there. Because our values are falling, even as we raise the tax rate, you still pay less on the tax bill because it's kind of this weird counterintuitive scale. So I'll explain that further in a moment. But it costs about $4 million to put these items back in. The majority of council yesterday seemed to want to continue to explore that option. So we decided to put it in here just for full transparency of what council's still deliberating on in the process. So this is what the newly recommended tax rate might look like, 70.56. And all that growth still goes toward the operations portion of the tax rate, because again, that's where we fund the general fund operating activities. So process we talked through, and then council recommendations there at the bottom are the new $4 million, and then that little tax rate bump to kind of balance that out. So that's like the real-time process update. We'll go through just a couple of highlights by council priority so that you know what's in and out. Community safety, really council's and the community's priority. Again, every time we do surveys like the budget priority survey, the community survey, people are like, we want police and fire need to keep up with growth. We want people to answer the phone when we call the police and show up on scene. And so there are most of the adds to the budget are related to police and fire. There is one shift that's happening in the budget. We've been showing it as an elimination, but it's really not. So I've changed the word here. So if you've been around, you've seen me talk about this one. The Fire Hope program, that's the homeless outreach prevention education function out of the fire department. When we took on MedStar, we also took on a mobile integrated health team on the EMS side. So the budget proposes to take firefighters out of the Hope team and move them back to firefighting, and then let the work continue on the EMS side in that MIH or mobile integrated health team. So it's just a shift, but it actually saves money because when firefighters are not in the fire station ready to respond to a fire, you have to backfill those vacant positions with other people who are, because there are minimum staffing requirements for fire. So by allowing the firefighters to go back to like on a fire truck or a fire station instead of doing the homeless outreach activities, it saves that like backfilled overtime. So a little tricky shift there, but that's the justification on that one. The rest of the fire items are additions, so funding to right size fire overtime. That means to align their budget with what they're really spending in overtime based on their sort of contractual requirements like those I just mentioned. And then we are seeing a theme of rising fleet costs across the city, and fires vehicles are some of the more expensive vehicles that we have. And so making sure they have the budget to continue to maintain those vehicles was important as well. On the police side, we regularly look at police staffing, of course, to make sure that they are keeping up with the growth of the city. And so our latest staffing study showed that they needed some support in patrol to continue to meet proactivity goals and response times goals. And so this budget adds 76 officers in patrol in order to match the growth of the city. It also creates 30 corporal positions in patrol. And so that actually flips 30 officers into corporals, which is like the next rank up. Right now, in order to promote in the police department, if you're a patrol officer, you have to leave patrol and go be like a detective or a corporal in a specialized unit. And so sometimes even when people love patrol, they don't necessarily come back to patrol for a long time, if at all, because they've had to leave and then they like go get a taste of life somewhere else in the police department, and it's just different. And so this is exciting because it creates a promotional path or spectrum for people who love patrol in the police department. And then the other public safety aspect is the emergency communications department. And so this year they've been piloting a program in Axon 911, which is assistive call taking technology. So it's like AI triage for non-emergency calls. So it leaves the emergency calls to the human kind of call takers to take care of, but helps to get the calls to the right spots depending on what they are on the non-emergency side. So it saves workload hours, and that team runs vacancies and they run on overtime sometimes, so it kind of helps the workload metrics as well. So we're hoping to fully fund that one in next year's budget. All right, we're moving right along here. On the infrastructure side, I mentioned that we wanted to keep our PAYGO investment steady. And so we have maintained the 7.25 cent PAYGO rate. However, remember, this is like the weird thing. As values fall, the same PAYGO rate doesn't create the same amount of revenue. And so there's a slight reduction that happens even by keeping the rate the same. And so even though it's still 7.25, there's actually a PAYGO reduction of about 2.8 million, and it's sort of spread through the different buckets in PAYGO. This budget does authorize the pavement management fee. You may have heard it as the street maintenance fee if you've been following that, generation of that fee over the last few years. It's a table over here if you haven't gotten to stop by. There's Lane over there, pavement management expert. But street maintenance is something we're sort of just rebranding it as we get closer to implementing it. Because it's not really just about maintenance and reactive repair of a pothole or something. It's really more about life cycle planning for the pavement. So managing really that whole program. And so you won't start to see that on your bill this year, but we're authorizing it now to allow the department to continue to march toward implementation of that fee. And part of that is making sure that it can appear on the water bill as their water's actually doing like a billing system update. So we want to make sure that they can put it on there. And let's see if I can keep talking. Continues water capital. So water is a regional utility growing at the same or bigger rate of the city of Fort Worth. And so their capital investments are significant. This budget continues some of that work, including the Marys Creek facility, as well as a cast iron replacement program. Okay, community investment. So this is where some of the reductions really happen in the budget, and I'll show you why in a minute. But when you think about the general fund being a third of the budget and over half the general fund being public safety, what else is in there that you can reduce from if you're not reducing public safety? And it's oftentimes things that fall into this category. So our goal here was to, again, attempt to minimize the service level impacts, but we also had to balance the budget and really avoid any kind of widespread closures of facilities like community centers and like libraries. And so this budget does that, especially after restoring some of the positions that council seems to want to put back in as of yesterday. But you see the strike through there on bullet 3. So again, our original presentation was showing the closure of Alliance. We're not doing that anymore, likely. We're getting claps for that. Thank you. Thank you. And then there are some reductions that are still in the budget. So one of those is there's a priority repair program that Neighborhood Services runs. It's a $2.5 million program, and it also has a grant funding that nearly doubles it. They did put a 3% reduction in as part of their 3% strategies balancing. So of the $2.5 million that's general fund funded, we'll see a reduction of $75,000. So not a big elimination or anything by any means, but a minor reduction there. The mobile tool shed program is a program we invested in this year. And again, as part of budget balancing, it slows it a little bit. So they'll pivot. It's a 4-person team. They're going to pivot one of those 4 people out in order to just continue to meet the core functions of code. And so you may see a service level delay on mobile tool shed. So maybe you will usually get tools in a couple of days, and now it might be 5 days, something like that. So code will continue to evaluate their staffing on that program. But they have seen some good success on that program. You may have seen some highlights in city news on that one. And then the neighborhood improvement program, I think some of you are familiar there too. So we did not want to reduce that program either, or eliminate it, that is, as part of budget balancing. But we do $4 million per neighborhood, and there's like one a year. But typically, it's a 3-year delivery, and in year 1, there's a lot of planning activities that happen. So those aren't very high-cost activities. So what we propose in the budget is to keep one neighborhood a year, but to align the year 1 spending with just that lower level of activity. So year 1, you might spend $1 million. It's where it's funded. And then in year 2, so next year's budget, we'd bump up, to $2 million or $2.5 million, depending on what all those planning activities say we need. And then it would phase down in year 3. So it's kind of like regulating the spend based on what's already happening in neighborhood services and the other departments as they plan with the neighborhoods. So I hope that's clear, that it's not an elimination, it's just more of a right sizing of that spending flow. Let's see. We also did a pilot this year in code for nuisance abatement. We called it NetForce. And the kind of tagline that the city used was becoming a nuisance to the nuisance properties. And we did see some great results with the pilot 3 properties. And so we're going to continue to fund that in next year's budget too. I know a couple people have been excited about that one. All right, in economic development, just a couple of things here. So typically the general fund transfers money over to an economic development initiatives fund in order to have money on hand for business attraction and incentives initiatives. And so that fund has a balance in it. It's not as high as we'd like it to be in order to compete with some of our neighbors who have 4A and 4B sales tax, which we do not. However, we felt in budget balancing, as far as minimizing public-facing service level impacts, we could take a pause on that transfer. So we reduced it from $5 million to $500,000 just to keep a base level of funding there, and in hopes to bump it up again in the future and continue to have that fund available. This budget does continue, though, partnerships with the local chambers, including the delivery of the Small Business Development Program. And we also added a position for the neighborhood revitalization efforts that occur in the city. We have these targeted areas for neighborhood revitalization, and they needed like a project coordinator to really keep those efforts moving along. Some of you are familiar with the Will Rogers Memorial Complex conversation. This budget reflects the management of that is moving over to a third party. So when you see public events or culture and tourism funds throughout the presentation and it looks like it's decreasing, some of that is due to that Will Rogers transition too. Last category is responsible growth, and this is just one of those categories that there's a lot of things that could fall into this bucket, so we tried to highlight just a few. We try to grow responsibly, and so a couple of things here. We are shifting funding for vehicles and equipment. We're still going to fund those replacements. We actually have a backlog of replacements to do, but rather than doing them in the general fund, we're going to do them in available tax notes. So it helps relieve the general fund's operating budget, but it doesn't stop us from actually replacing the vehicles. So that's just kind of a funding shift. And we're also seeing rising costs of health claims in the city. And so we didn't want to pass those costs onto our employees. And so instead we bumped up the employer contributions to continue to fund the health fund itself. And so when you see budget growth on some that are pretty flat, you have to know that they've actually increased their health costs like by 40% and are still flat or falling. So that kind of tells you that a lot of people were being reduced, but we had to bump up everybody's budgets for health. And we continue to see public information requests or open records requests growing. And so the budget continues to fund support for that function. It's like a state mandated with timelines function that's really important. We talked a little bit about inflation in vehicles and maintenance, a theme across the budget. We'll talk more about fees in a minute. And then at City Hall, the facility, we reduced maintenance funding and some of the parking garage and parking lot, sweeping schedules and all that kind of stuff, just to try to, again, kind of belt tighten and balance. All right, we'll take a minute to talk about general fund. You'll get to see here like departments growth. So for those of you who want to see specifics, this is the section in which you'll see those. So this is revenue versus expenditures in the general fund. You can see in that bottom bar, it says 0, and that's, again, because we have to balance, right? Revenues and expenditures, so you want it to say 0. Otherwise, it would not be ready to present. So property tax is, by and large, the biggest revenue source in the general fund. So that's when I tell you that when the appraisal activity is weird, then the budget gets weird, and that's what's happened now. But property and sales tax together make up about 80%. So sales tax is growing about 5%, which is great. It's flattened out. We had like big double-digit growth in sales tax after COVID, but that was never going to just last forever. So we feel really good about this 5% growth number, which also funds CCPD. We'll see that in a minute. They're growing by about that same amount. And then on the expense side, really the main thing to call out here is that salary and benefits it's about 70% of the expenses in the general fund, and a lot of that is police and fire. So here's a department view, and I have a graphic too in a minute that might be easier to see where the increases and decreases are. This is just in alphabetical order. So you see total budget $1.156 billion. This is growth by department, or in many cases, not growth, loss by department. So budget increases and decreases. So you see public safety growing if you can find fire and police. And then you see quite a few that are pretty flat or falling. I'm going to use this graphic to reemphasize that the total operating budget of $3.32 billion, most of those funds are restricted to their own purposes. And so you kind of see the breakdown, but then you go to the middle, which is just general fund, so a third of that big number. And then 57% of the general fund is public safety. So that includes police, fire, and then emergency communications and management. And so then again, like I mentioned earlier, then like if you're trying to balance the budget and you can't or won't touch public safety, then where do the reductions come from? And on the right-hand side, you see every other general fund department. And that's why you're seeing a lot of flat or falling budget in those groupings. So here is the visual that I mentioned of increases and decreases by general fund department. So again, our public safety friends at the top, fire, police, and emergency management. So fire, $52 million there. Part of that is the subsidy to EMS. So many of you know that we took on MedStar EMS on July 1st of 2025. So this has been our first budget year as a full year. And that EMS service is a special revenue fund, but it's not self-supporting at this time. I think we'd love for that to happen. It will be difficult to get there. But there are strategies underway to try to increase the revenue to the EMS fund. For now, the general fund is still subsidizing that service. And so that is 30 million of the 52. We had 20 million budgeted this year in a subsidy. So we moved that 20 into fire's budget. It grew by 10, so that's 30 million. Their other 22 is contractual placeholder. They're in negotiations right now with their it's called the 440. That's kind of like their union, basically, in order to figure out their labor contract. So we have a placeholder in the budget for that. And then I mentioned we were sort of right-sizing their fleet money as well as their overtime money to align with their actual spend. So that's fire's growth. And then police's growth is almost all tied to their meet and confer or labor agreement. So they're getting, as scheduled, a 6% raise in fiscal year 27. And then emergency management, some of that is that Axon pilot that I mentioned, which is the assistive call taking technology. They're also a new department, so they're for the first time seeing allocations for health, for instance, and IT and some of the other things that departments typically pay for that they didn't have to pay for this year. I'll go through the bottom three. So very bottom is property management. That's the department that manages city facilities. And the reason they look like they're going way down there is because they're the holder of the vehicle and equipment replacement funding. So that's where that funding lives. So when we shift it out of the general fund and onto tax notes, like the debt side, it looks like a big reduction for them, but it's really just a pivot to a different spot. Economic development, that's nearly all tied to that transfer that I mentioned that we're sort of pausing out to the Economic Development Initiatives Fund. And then neighborhood services, that is, again, nearly all tied to phasing the delivery of the neighborhood improvement program. So when I talked about the year one spend's typically lower, and then we'll bump it up for next year, that's what you're seeing there. So they look like scary reductions here, but we've tried to either pivot or shift right-size funding as needed along the way. And you kind of see everybody else in the middle, kind of all these people that are falling, that's already with their like 40% higher health costs and some of the other things that are built in there. So that's kind of where everybody sits right now. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin in the general fund, and we'll come back to any questions that you might have. Quickly touch on enterprise funds. So this is another group of operating funds not funded by taxes, funded by user fees, rates, etc. They run kind of like a business. They're self-supporting. Water's the biggest. Their budget is growing by 8.7%. That's not rate growth. That's just their budget growth for their operating and capital needs. Solid waste is the next that you see there, 14.85% growth. Solid waste is, you'll see all the rates in a minute, but they're planning not just for their contractual obligations with Waste Management, which is our vendor for residential collection, but also for long-term planning for the landfill replacement eventually. So they're kind of having to look forward and ensure that they're following their plan. Stormwater, there's a table over here for stormwater with Jennifer. Stormwater utility, also an enterprise fund where you see that on your water bill. They are also on a plan. They're seeing a 5% rate increase, so you can see it's not as big as their budget growth. That will enable them to continue mid-sized flood mitigation projects, increase the number of channel inspections, and all of that life safety work that comes with flood mitigation and stormwater management. And then two that are municipal, airports, and parking. So airports are our three city airports, Meacham, Spinks, and Perot Field. And then parking, that's municipal parking. So city-owned garages, meters, lots. And again, not subsidized by the general fund, but just paid for by people who use it, work there, lease spaces in the airports, et cetera. And that other sort of, when we talked about the big three types of operating funds, the last one is special revenue. So the biggest is CCPD, I mentioned. These are restricted, like revenue source and restricted uses. So CCPD, restricted revenue source is half-cent sales tax authorized by voters in 2020 for a 10-year period. Restricted is, it has to be crime control and prevention. So there has to be a very clear connection with what CCPD funds to crime control and prevention. Public events, you can think of those as culture and tourism funds. So restricted revenue source there is HOT, hotel occupancy tax, restricted for tourism activities. So think about the convention center, Will Rogers, again, we mentioned here, seeing some budget decrease there. You see a budget decrease there because the convention center expansion, like the phase that it's in, takes some of the key spaces offline during fiscal year 27. So there'll be less revenue, like less reservations, that kind of thing. EMS is third biggest now, special revenue fund. So this 103.9 million there, it includes the EMS subsidy from the general fund that I mentioned. You can find in fire's budget. And there's a couple different departments in EMS. It's not just fire. It's also, they get some support from HR and legal, from finance for billing. And then the Office of the Medical Director, which kind of holds like the licenses for the paramedics and EMTs. So they're growing by 16%. That's also in anticipation of pay in the new labor agreement. Environmental, you see on your water bill as well. It's growing from $2.25 to $2.50. I'll show you that in a minute. You don't have to remember. But that fund, citywide litter abatement, street sweepers, if you see those, nuisance, like cleanup, illegal camp cleanup. So all of that comes from that environmental fund. And then we have municipal golf, so city golf courses, not subsidized by the general fund or taxes. Those are paid for by people who go play golf. They're growing a bit because they have more people coming, which is great. So they're adding food and beverage attendants and maintenance workers. And then we have a small fund for community tree planting. I had somebody very concerned the other night about the trees. The trees are not going away. The reason that it looks like a reduction is because they bought a piece of equipment in the current year. Now they don't have to buy it, so it looks like a reduction. So it's just kind of those like year over year changes that look funny sometimes. So we'll talk about fees. When departments put their budgets in, they also look at their fees. There's all kinds of fees that happen in the city, most of which you don't see. So think about like, maybe you're coming to do a program that has a dollar figure attached to it, or we talked yesterday about like birthday party related fees. There's fines. Hopefully you don't have to pay those for anything. All kinds of stuff. So not just the ones that appear on your water bill, but lots and lots of fees that the city can charge in a variety of circumstances. 9 departments are recommending fee changes. Sometimes they're increases, sometimes they're decreases. We have like 60 decreases this year, but mostly it's increases depending on the market and cost of service recovery. And so council adopts the fee ordinance at the same time as the budget ordinance. So that happens in mid-September. This is the way that the rates and fees that you do see on the water bill kind of stack up for next year based on the budgets I showed you. So top section is property tax related. We're showing them together here, obviously knowing that your property tax bill is paid for separately, annually versus monthly, but just for comparison purposes. So top row, I mentioned that because of TAD's activities, average home taxable value, that's the real figure. And it has a homestead applied, so if it looks low, it's probably because it's subject to a homestead exemption. Falling from 246 to 232, and that's again because values are frozen and people are protesting their values. And so tax values falling, so even with a 3.2 or in the bottom a 3.5% or cent tax rate, your tax bill for 27 is slightly lower than it is this year because of that value. There's actually a graphic here that shows that same concept, kind of funny little scale. So this year's value times this year's tax rate, 1651. That's the city's portion of the tax bill. Remember your tax bill, if you're like, that's not what my tax bill is, you pay other taxing entities too, like the school district and the county and like maybe a hospital district or something else. So city's portion. But then property value decreases, tax rate increases, and then your bill on the city side, again, is slightly reduced because of that kind of counterintuitive balance. In the yellow, you can see even at the 3.55 cents or 3.56 cents that council may go to after yesterday, the tax bill is still down. It's not quite down by $16. It'd be down by $8. So the restorations from yesterday for those service level impacts still leaves us on the net, positive for you side. The bottom section is the fees and rates on the water bill. And so you can see the annual variance, so starting with the $4 for stormwater, and then in the last column, the monthly variance. So month over month across those fees, about $7.09 different from current year to next year. All right, I'm gonna land the plane here. We're almost done. So capital, we do the capital 5-year rolling plan as part of the budget too. So when you hear like a total city budget number and it starts with a 4, it's because it includes capital. Operating budget is $3.3 billion. The capital adds another $1.03 billion for fiscal year 27. And so the large majority of that is water. You can see they're clocking in here at like $800 million again to keep up with that regional utility growth. And we've talked a little bit about PAYGO. So this is the portion of the budget that's that 7.25 cents on the tax rate. And because we left it static and values have fallen, remember it garners just a little bit less revenue than the current year. So transportation and public works isn't really losing any revenue. They're just not really growing either. Same with parks. But you do see a reduction in neighborhood services. That, again, is the neighborhood improvement program, not going away, but right-sizing the year 1 funding for how it naturally flows. So that's why it looks like a big reduction there. But other than that, it's pretty well spread. And there's the 4 number that I mentioned. So fiscal year 27 budget, $4.35 billion between operating and capital. And I think we're done with numbers. Okay, so community engagement, you've obviously seen something about community engagement, which is great because you're here and we love it. And District 11 always has like a full room, which I do appreciate. So we're on District 11 there in the bottom right corner. And we have a couple more. I think this is actually our halfway mark. I think this is 5 of 10. And so that's why I'm getting more chaotic as we go. And I do this presentation many times, but feel free to tune in, look back using the city's YouTube if you need to remind yourself of some information, or attend any ones you want. And we have a budget public hearing with council, a special called meeting to hear the budget on September 1st. That's just another step in the process. That doesn't mean that's what we're adopting. It's just another option for you to come and speak to council. You have one council member here, of course, but in that case, you'd have all of them there to listen to any kind of feedback. And then we'll continue to finalize the budget through September 15th. That's when they're scheduled to adopt the tax rate and the budget and fees. And I'll leave it here for you for anybody who's QR code interested. On the left is Connect Fort Worth, so that's all things Fort Worth engagement. Right now, the budget's like the star of the show on Connect Fort Worth. You can ask questions there. You can see all the resources that we've presented so far. And on the right, it's the lab's budget page, which is very organized from April to now. Every work session that we've done on budget, all the different written responses, which are called budget responses, that we have submitted to council if you want to read any detail on any of the topics that we've talked about. A lot of them are there. The budget book, if you just really want to lull yourself into oblivion on a Saturday night, you can read that. It's for like 400 pages long. There's a lot of good detail there. Yeah, so you'll find all kinds of good detail and information there. But that concludes our formal presentation. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. And we'll answer any questions that you have.
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, and we're going to make you use the mic, which I know, but it's because we're streaming. So, yeah.
Thank you. Can I hold it? You hold it? All right. I ain't going to steal it. Hey, you were on your first slide. You had Collin County, Dallas, and Fort Worth, and you were comparing us to Collin
Tarrant.
County.
Uh-huh.
Those people make a whole bunch more money than we do. They're in a different money, So, what I was getting at, I've been working at Dallas probably like 15 years ago, and Dallas roads are terrible. If you're on the freeway, they're great, but if you get off the freeway, we used to move furniture and stuff like that. They're terrible. So I don't know how their numbers are going up, or they're getting close to Collin County percentage. But as far as Fort Worth, I've been living here all my life, and the roads that we have here are terrible in my neighborhood. I live in Worth Heights neighborhood, and then I built a house in Rosemont 2 years ago, and a brand new home, and they started, when I went to go pay my taxes, it was like $4,000, $4,200. And I'm like, how the heck did that get to $4,200? When I talk to my neighbors, some of those are even paying less than that. Mm-hmm. So I didn't think that was fair. And then I talked to the guy that does the tax appraisal, whoever it is. They said, well, okay, we'll knock it down 39. I'm like, dude, that's still not right. When these guys are paying $1,500, $1,600, $1,800
Mm-hmm.
just because I put a brand new home, now you're going to charge me $4,000, $4,200. And then the neighborhood's still, I mean, polite word, nice word, dilapidated. It's not gotten any better. Everything looks the same. If something's run down, it's going down further. So I'm just wondering, how do they? Is anybody walking out there looking? Hey, man, this place is worth $15,000, or for taxes or whatever. Because I was kind of upset, and the reason I guess I'm complaining is because my taxes are due pretty soon in December, and so again I'm going to be the one shelling out the money, and I would just want to say my 2 cents about that. Yeah. So if you have a good answer, I'm waiting for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Jay talk too if he'd like. So just on the first slide, that is just comparing appraisal activity between Dallas's appraisal district, Collins, and ours. So it just meant to show the fact that Tarrant is falling sort of behind and even reducing values, which is just very different than we've seen before. And to your point, and I'll let Jay talk too, we are seeing very strange equity or maybe non-equitable activities from Tarrant Appraisal. I think the answer to your question is that nobody is walking around the neighborhood and looking. They're doing mass appraisals, and they're sort of talking about, when the chief appraiser came to council, they talked about knowing that the average taxable value is 15 to 20% below market, and so next year when they reappraise, your value is when you get your next tax bill, it's going to be likely significantly more. And so then we expect okay, then people will protest and they'll talk about what their neighbors are paying, just like you're doing now. And so that's what makes it really hard to sort of forecast on the budget side what we can really plan for. But I'll let Jay talk about other philosophy things if you like.
So if you're complaining about the appraisals, complain to Tarrant Appraisal District, because we have no control over the appraisals. That's what that slide was meant to show. Is Fort Worth is the fastest growing city large city, over 500,000 in the country. So we're growing faster than Dallas. You would think that with the amount of growth that we were having, that our values would be going up with it, but instead you saw the values are actually going down, and which doesn't make, it's counterintuitive. It had been going up the last several years. That's why we lowered our tax rate 8 of the last 10 years. But with the change in Tarrant Appraisal District's practices, it's created this odd situation where you just, from a city budgeting side, when it comes to the general fund, the only revenue that we control is property taxes, and the only lever of that is the tax rate, because the appraisal district controls the appraisals. And so it's half of that equation that the city council has control over. And so if you have any issues with the appraisal side, you should contact the appraisal district. I would call Joe Don directly, who is the chief appraiser, and have him explain it to you, because he's leading that charge.
That D-O-N or?
Joe, yeah, J-O-D-O-N. Bob, it's the last name.
Along the same line, I'm wondering if TAD, I guess, collects from companies and corporations as well for the property taxes?
They did reappraise companies, and I think, and this is not, we haven't done a full dive to see if this is what's happened. But last year they didn't appraise, but they also didn't accept as many protests, right? They had some protests on the residential side, but I get the feeling that they overappraised on the business side to try to make up some of the loss on the residential side. And so last year they didn't appraise on the residential side. They had some reduction because of protests, but we had a net 5.9% growth over everything, which makes sense with our growth.
Well,
But this year, the businesses said, "Oh, we're not taking it twice," so more businesses protested than ever,
that was
which
my
dropped that
question
cost.
is, are they paying their fair share? And also, are they taking advantage of loopholes and tax abatements?
So they're paying the share that they're valued at. So again, we don't control the value. That's appraisal district does. So businesses are paying their taxes based on their values. I guess just like the homestead exemption, if a business has inventory that leaves the state within 175 days and they're eligible for the statewide Freeport exemption on inventory, I'm sure they're taking care of that. I mean, taking advantage of that. But there's no wholesale tax abatements. The tax abatements that the city provides are really meant to try to get a business to come here to create new investment, to create high-paying jobs, those kind of things. So there's not just a loophole of just open tax abatement. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'll piggyback on that. So Fort Worth's residential property tax base has significantly outpaced its commercial tax base, leaving homeowners carrying a larger share of the property tax burden. I think it's close to a 60-40 split. What is the city's plan to move us closer to a 50-50 residential commercial tax base?
So we have an active overall economic development plan. In fact, we're updating our current economic development strategic plan now. 14 years ago, that was 65-35. So it's moved to 60-40, and so we actually have progress as we go forward. The big boom back of the aughts with easy home mortgages and those kind of things, and Fort Worth having abundant water system and all the green space is where you saw all that growth up north and to the southwest. And so that's kind of what the residential growth outpaced the commercial growth. And so we're slowly getting that back. You know, the big thing, and the big thing that happens sometimes is when we do have potential for large commercial projects and they're going to be situated somewhere, lots of times we have the neighborhoods come out against them. And so that makes it harder on elected officials to say, yes, let's rezone that and do there, because so that balance, when you look at it from if you pull apartment complexes out of the residential side, it's more of about a 53, 54, 46, 47. So we're closer to 50-50. And we always group apartment complexes into the residential side because they are residents, but they're really businesses. So you can almost pull them out and look at it from that perspective. But Dallas, on the other hand, though, if you compare Dallas, Dallas is more on 60%. So that's how they can stabilize their tax base. But Dallas has other problems that we don't have. They've got pension issues they've never addressed. They've got street issues, as you mentioned. So they have different issues that they're dealing with.
I'm going to stand up. My name is Christopher Johnson, president of Poly Heights Neighborhood Association, also a community advocate, and I represent 10 neighborhood associations and businesses. I'm about transparency, and as a taxpayer, I want to make sure our money is going to what benefits the community. One thing, Jay, I'm glad you're here. Last public town hall, I emailed you, and I hadn't heard back from you. I know you're
Emailed
real
me?
busy. Yes. So I did email you, just so you know, and I'll email you again. I know you're a busy man. One of the things, if you notice, the police department, the fire department, we need that, but that's a big percentage of the budget, and then the things below that affects the regular everyday citizens, those are the things that's being cut. We have 105-degree weather. That's hot. We only have one public swimming pool. So we see these funds up here. We need to make sure we're taking care of the citizens. As a homeowner, if you look at the budget, it's almost like I have a insurance, and most of my pay is going to 90% of my insurance policy. What would be wrong with that? That's what we need to look at. We would not want to pay 90% of our homeowners insurance out of our pay. That just wouldn't be right. So when you look at the top of the budget, we need to look at that and see how we can cut some things. Right now, I was glad to see Williams, our commander, he retired. But when I called to find out who our new commander was, they told me we don't have one. With a budget like that, we should have and know who our commander is. My neighborhood is getting crazy, and I need to know who the commander is, and again, we don't have one. So when the city's saying we are paying all these millions and millions, we need to make sure we have the commander that's there for the residents, and also there's just a lot of things, but I will be emailing you
Okay.
a lot because I know you can't answer every single question. I'll stop here, give other people a chance, and I'm gonna come back with another question.
Hello, my name's Rachel Fox, and I have a question about the neighborhood improvement program.
Yes, ma'am.
You said there was $4 million that's allotted and to one neighborhood, right?
Correct. So this has been, I think, what are we, number 6? So it's been going on for 6 years. It's a program the city council approved where we take data and identify neighborhoods that need the most work, right? It's a combination of poverty and infrastructure needs and all these different factors. And the original neighborhood was in Stop 6, a portion of Stop 6. And we've gone through that process, and the traditional way of doing it is we would allocate about $4.2 million in the budget. It goes to that neighborhood. It gets to a separate fund. Staff then works with the neighborhood to identify the things that the neighborhood wants to see improvements: sidewalks, street lights, things that are missing like that. Mostly infrastructure one-time costs because it's not operating every year. And so we've been doing that for, like I said, this year is the 6th year of it. But because of the budget impacts, usually it takes 3 years to implement that program, that $4.2 million. And typically the first year is several meetings of planning. Then there might be the first phase of some infrastructure. But we never spend more than $1 million in any of those before on that first year. So in order to try to balance the budget, lessen the impact on the budget, is we recommended just funding $1 million for this first year so that we can start that process. Is anybody from Neighborhood Services, or Dana, do you remember the neighborhood that's selected this year? Oh, we haven't announced it. The council went through it, we haven't announced it yet. But we wanted to make sure we had the program. But they go through a process. We'll start that process. We'll start that. Next year, we'll probably recommend adding $2 million for the neighborhood that's selected this year, and then the 1 million for the next year's neighborhood. So we're not doing away with the program. It's just going to be more of a smoothing in on the actual costs, and that gets moved into that fund for that neighborhood, so they can finalize their programs.
So that the fund it's graduated over a total of 4 years then?
Yes, it's graduated, actually at 3 years. And most programs, most of those have been completed in 3. There's been a couple where neighborhoods had said they wanted this, and then halfway through they said, no, we wanted this, and so you had to change the design and those kind of things, so it's gone to 4 years. But instead of, at some point, when you have multiple programs going, we're gonna be back at 4 million. But to be able to help us with this budget situation we have this year that we're hoping is a 1 year, once we kind of figure out how TAD is doing the appraising, we're gonna need to structurally change how we budget so that we can address that long term. So hopefully in the next couple of years we can do that, and then we won't have this kind of up and down going every year.
We were just concerned that we wanted to make sure that the people that live in the neighborhoods have more input as to where the money is being spent, and that, you know, that the city will let us know exactly what's being allotted and you know, the time that it will take to get certain improvements. And
Sure.
our concern was a library in our neighborhood that we would like to have reopened, which is the History Center.
Right.
You know, and so we were told one thing, and then sometimes it changes, and we like to be updated on.
Well, the neighborhood improvement program would not go toward a library because that has operating costs tied to it. But typically what it's gone to is improvements of infrastructure improvements. Like I mentioned, either there's been some folks that wanted cameras in the parks, or new lights in the parks, or sidewalks where there isn't sidewalks, those kind of things.
So it's a separate fund.
Yes.
If Fort Worth property tax base is currently growing differently from Dallas and Collin County, which some of the residents was concerned, what is the city's long-term strategy for increasing revenue through economic growth rather than continually increasing costs and fees on the existing household?
Well, we're actively working with the Economic Development Partnership to try to attract new business to Fort Worth. Well, there's been a few announcements in the last year. Wistrom just opened about a month ago. They invested $537 million and hired like 500 and something people, average job 129,000. So those are the kind of, it's mostly been the businesses that have been attracted to Fort Worth are pretty like high-tech manufacturing because
How many businesses?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we've had, it's available on our economic development website or on the EDP website. There's all the businesses that have been attracted. We had just so you know, we had $2 billion of new value added to the tax rolls this past year, but not the reappraisals of residential and the lowering took that all off the books. So we lost 1.8 billion in residential values existing, even though we added 2 billion. That's the issue that we're having. If residential would have stayed flat, we would have been probably okay.
Regarding the tool shed, the program, I think it was said, was going to be reduced, at least in the time, 2 days versus 5 days of receiving equipment or whatever. I hate seeing any reductions whatsoever to this program, mainly because whenever you have people in need of those services, usually they have code on their butt, and they have to abate the problem that they are up against, high grass and weeds or whatever that may be, or face face penalties. I think there should be a way to find the money to fully fund that program. So whenever we have people, like I said, whenever you're facing penalties or whatever, citation, they should not be up against waiting 3 extra days to get the equipment they need to abate that problem.
Okay, thank you for the feedback.
Yes, related to the libraries, thank you for putting those, changing the staffing. I think that's a really good move. But moving forward, I would still like to, I'm concerned that this budget is going to impact the collections and materials that are available through the library system. I know that our staff at the library work very hard to run it efficiently and make sure that every branch in our city has access to all of the materials. And so it's basically a science. They move the materials as needed from one branch to another, and I would hate to see our library become obsolete and not keep up with the most current materials available. Our libraries are being used more and more as our population increases, but as the heat continues, our people need some relief from the heat, and they will go to a library. So we need to make sure that the libraries are not only staffed, but also have the equipment and materials that are needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank you for including the Seminary South Library in the bond, and I know a lot of us are really excited about it reopening. I have a concern that I use it as the history center now, and I've seen water intrusion during rain, and I just want to make sure that when it's given back to the community, that maintenance issue has been addressed.
Okay, thanks for letting us know. Make sure facilities knows about that. Sure.
I just wanted to very quickly address the pool question. My name is Dave Lewis. I'm the Director of Park and Recreation. Good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. So currently we have two pools, Forest Park and Marine Park pool. We are in design for a third pool at MLK at Stop 6. The bond passed a fourth pool that'll be located in North Zebos. We also have an agreement with the YMCA that the East Side YMCA, the McDonald YMCA, our pools are available to residents. You do not have to be a member. They are the same cost as the city pools as well. So we're working with other agencies. We don't always have to build the pools, but make sure that we're partnering to provide that asset. Also, thanks to Representative Collier, we have a great splash pad that's going to also be built at Sycamore Park as well. So just wanted to, and it's a little different because that's more bond funded and capital rather than the operating, but the point's well taken about the resources to provide the needed services to the community. So thank you.
I was going to talk about the lawsuits against the city of Fort Worth. Maybe I'm just say the police department, for example, they get a lawsuit. Was that entered into the budget? Because I didn't see. I know they do happen, but I didn't see if that was the reason they wanted more money. I'm with the police. They need all the money they can get, and I love flock cameras too. And
Yeah, that's not part of the operating budget. We have a risk fund, so the city's self-insured, so it's a different fund that dollars are collected over time, and whenever there's a lawsuit you have to pay out, it comes out of that fund specifically. It's not part of the increase that you saw on the police side. Councilwoman?
Hey, Jay. So this is more of a comment, you know, like Christopher said, that they don't know who their commander is, and I wasn't made aware until the next day when some community members were aware of who the new commander was. So PD does need to do a better job about getting that information out and announcing those promotions. So we do have a commander, Commander Metters, and just, you know, and I know he'll be out to the neighborhood associations to introduce himself, but that is an area of improvement.
William Johnson, the Assistant City Manager of PD, is here. He heard that comment, so he'll make sure that happens.
Hi. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having this. On the who is working with you in the community, we had a change in the code people who were in Polytechnic Heights South, and don't know who those people are. I knew who the lead person was and my particular people, but now I don't know who those people are. Same as with the commander. So, yes, and then I understand that you are redoing or updating, I should say, the neighborhood database, and it's offline right now, so there's no way of being able to figure out who anybody is. You're going the wrong way.
I don't know about the neighborhood database, but Michelle Goot would.
Yes, we've updated the database, and we're still working with IT on the public-facing portal, but we have a message on the database. If there's any information you need for neighborhood contacts, just call our office and we'll get that information for you. The actual maps for the neighborhood associations, that's all still accurate. Mainly it's just the point of contact that might have changed. So just contact us and we'll get you that information. And once the new database is public, we'll be sure and let everybody know. code and police, you should actually go to one address because that's where that's being updated.
Hello. Yes, I would like to bring up that was like the funding that we get, like for the community centers for after-school programs, or having funding for the education programs and everything such that the kids need due to the problems that we're having in Fort ISD. Also, the Parks Department, are we going to get any funding for the Ezequiel Vasquez Park when it opens up, like for baseball league and things like that, programs for the park for the kids?
Well, the after-school programs aren't, they're not being impacted at all by the budget, so that should be fine. I think Dave can answer the other.
Yes, Ezequiel Vasquez Park will open in the spring. We're very excited for that, and we will have funding to do the maintenance, and we'll open it up to whichever Little Leagues want to use those fields as well.
The city doesn't provide funding for the actual leagues.
No funding for the league?
The city doesn't provide funding for the leagues. Typically, it's a private group that uses our parks for that kind of activity.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for restoring the funding for critical programs that were brought up in multiple sessions. Appreciate that. I do want to speak up for the cleanliness of the city. Environmental Services takes care of that. And if there's any way to add a little more money to their budget, it'd be great, because we are such a trashy city. It's just not very presentable to the public. So if there's any way to give them a little more money.
That's one of the fee increases on the environmental fee. That's part of that, is try to keep up with that need in the city. It's only a quarter, but it's a significant. It's 10% of the overall fee. So.
Thank you to Councilwoman Martinez and Jay for being here, everybody else that is here. My question is, I think you said Environmental Services also takes care of the cleaning for the unhoused encampments. Have you seen more increase in those house encampments in different parts of the city? I just wonder if because of an increase of that, it's, we need more labor towards that.
So it's hard to say that we've seen more. They've been around for a while. I think we're finding more, right? We now know where to look. A lot of encampments are happening in really thick brush and that kind of thing. And the advent of drones, and now you get more information. People send a drone up, and all of a sudden you can see a camp that they never saw before. So it's like anything else. We're learning where all that is. So they're called Inspired, right? Aspire teams are folks that were formerly homeless or trying to come out of homeless that are hired to go in and do that kind of cleanup. And so, yes, we continually utilize those folks and those teams to work on that cleanliness side, and it comes out of that fee, and that fee is being recommended to be increased.
I just wanted to say something positive for our neighborhood. We work directly with code compliance in our neighborhood, even though they change quite frequently. We find out who the new one is and we start again. And also, Jeanette Martinez's office helps us tremendously. In our neighborhood, we've already gotten one house destroyed. We've gotten 6 put on substandard. We have gotten bulky waste to come out, turned over to environment to clean up after the fact. We have had our code compliance officer out yesterday that did 6 bulky waste that were out of cycle, that were piled up at the curb. So if you can work directly with a code compliance person and you keep after them, I'm telling you, they will get your neighborhood cleaned up. And so I really appreciate Jeanette Martinez's office for helping us so much, and for code compliance helping us.
Well, thanks for that. So, code compliance officers, that's one of the really tough jobs in the city. It turns over a lot because it's a hard job, one, and two, we often train folks. They'll start with the city, and then you'll have a smaller city where it's a lot easier to work in, offer them as much or more money, and our folks will go, oh, we're going to go to North Richland Hills or South Lake or Grapevine, right? And they don't have the same kind of issues. And so I think Brian's folks do a great job. You know, if we could reduce that turnover, we'd have more consistency across the city as we go forward.
The neighborhood services is being reduced by 3.59 million. So my question is, a lot of citizens, they can't afford like a roof or their plumbing. Their houses have just gone downhill. That department really has helped a lot of citizens. So my question is, would that be?
That reduction's just for the neighborhood improvement program. That one program, that's where the reduction's coming at.
Okay. So it won't affect that
It won't.
department?
Yeah, the one small reduction is 75,000 in the priority repair program.
Okay.
But like was mentioned, that's still going to have almost 2.4 million in general fund and another 2 million of grant fund. So it is going to, over time, I don't think we spend all that money in 1 year because we don't have enough contractors to get all that done. So over the next 2 or 3 years, it's a difference of maybe 5 to 7 homes that don't get done during that time period. But if we're able to restore that as we go along, then that'll become part of it.
And then I had a second question. A lot of the information that was available today, I had called several departments and I was getting information, but when I asked for a breakdown of the budget, they said you have to fill out an Opens Request Act. And I'm thinking,
You can just go to the website. All of these presentations are on our website in the Fort Worth lab.
okay, C was a city employee.
Right down here.
She was the one that told me I needed to, so she probably didn't know, but she said,
Right.
can't
Typically,
answer.
if somebody calls for specific information, the way we track it is through she was just giving you the process to go through. But if you go to our website, you can find all of these presentations on there.
and again, that makes a difference. I can't stress that enough. These are our tax dollars. We need to remember that. Think of somebody going in your pocket and they're getting your money. We tend to see it separate, like, well, that's not my money. No, it is your money, and we need to hold people accountable. It's that simple. Will you give a 12-year-old, your child, your whole wallet and say, go spend what you want? That's what you're doing when you don't hold the city accountable. That's what we need to start thinking about. This is my money. This is our money. We live in the city of Fort Worth. It's a great city. We've got a lot of great people that do a lot of great things, but we just need to do a little bit. We can always do better. Okay.
I wish I was 12 again. I could deal with this heat better. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to our councilwoman, see if she has any final words. Thank you for being here on this hot day and spending the time with us.
Thank you, Christiane and Jay, for a great budget presentation. And thank you all. Such a great turnout. I see friends and neighbors from all over the district and maybe some from others. But, you know, I'm glad y'all came out and heard a little bit about the budget, the proposed budget. And I'm really wanted to come and be in person so I can gauge, see what, you know, the reactions were on the second proposed tax rate. I feel like people understand that that is very much a need, because we don't want to have a reduction in services. These services impact you on the day-to-day. These are your tax dollars. And these are basic services that you like I said, you pay and you deserve, and we deserve to live in a great city, and I feel like Fort Worth is doing a really good job. You know, there's always areas of improvement. You know, I know on my end, I would like to see more police patrolling the parks, and I did have a talk with the chief of police about that, and there is a plan in place, and it is a very tight budget year, and we can't get some of the programs that we would like to see. So hopefully pushing those out to next year, or maybe even bringing them in slowly and reclassing some positions. But again, thank you for coming out on a Saturday. I know it's really hard to come out on your days off, but appreciate you for being engaged, and we'll be here for a little bit longer, I think. Or are we done? No? Well, my staff is here. I'll be here for a few more minutes. If you have any questions, please come over. Thank you.